Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Smart Grid Forum's webinar on navigating the Threat-Scape. My name is Mandana White, and I'm the CEO of Smart Grid Forums, and I'm delighted to see so many people registered for the webinar today on such an important and timely topic. I think we can all agree that the SolarWinds cyber attack just before Christmas was a big shock to us all, and that the past year has been a hothouse for cyber activity. So with what's going on in the geopolitical arena as well, I think that we can expect more attacks in the year ahead, and more serious attacks, and perhaps more nation-state actors getting involved with the power grid. So that's not to frighten anyone, but just to kind of set the scene for how things are heating up. Also, new trends around crime as a service, ransomware as a service via the dark web is just pushing the urgency of how we need to take more immediate action to secure the power grid in the short term. So I'm delighted to see so many of you here to raise your awareness about what's going on in terms of trends for cybersecurity for the power grid, and to really understand what the threat is going to look like in the next two to 3 years, so that we can proactively get ahead of the threat. Today we've got a really interesting program for you. We start with a presentation looking at the trends in the Threat-Scape. We move on to look at a utility case study from Ukraine, and then we finish with some a focus on solutions and technologies. So I think that's a well-rounded set of presentations, and then we'll go into Q&A, and I want to encourage you all to be as interactive and as forthcoming with your questions as possible. Just to give you a quick tour of the platform here, it's quite simple and intuitive. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that we have a chat panel. And this is really just to exchange informal information in case you're having any technical difficulties that you'd like us to take a look at, or if you'd just like to introduce yourself and to state your objectives, that's the place to do it. Down the bottom of the screen here, we have an Ask a Question link. So I'd encourage you to post your questions there as and when they occur to you as we're going through the presentations, and also to have a look at the questions that are already there and upvote any that you feel should be prioritized for addressing. We have about 20 minutes for Q&A, so please keep the questions coming. I'd encourage you to do that. Okay, so perhaps we can just start with everybody just posting in the chat panel on the right what your intention for the webinar is, so we're aware of that ahead of time. What you'd like to get out of this webinar today, perhaps what's the reason you're here and what you'd like to get out of it. That would be really interesting for everyone to have a look at. So we'll keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, I'd like to introduce to you our first speaker for the webinar. And that is Dr. Richard Smith, Deputy Director of Cyber Technology Institute Research Group at De Montfort University here in the UK. And Dr. Smith is focused on the research that centers on investigating new ways to defend old technology, with a particular focus on critical national infrastructure and smart grids, and developing new, more proactive incident response techniques. So welcome, Dr. Smith. And with that, I'd like to hand over to you to share your presentation and take us through the next 10 minutes or so.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mandana. Hopefully everyone can see my presentation now. Yes, I am Dr. Richard Smith from the Cyber Technology Institute at De Montfort University. And what I'd like to do today is just talk about the current threat landscape that we're seeing, how we see it progressing, and hopefully one or two ideas that we can use to try and get ahead of the game, as it were. So I think it's important to start by appreciating that the sector is going through a significant change. So certainly within the UK, it's predicted that the smart digital transformation is going to take place from now up until 2030 or so. And what this means is we're going to see huge numbers of new devices being connected, both from the general public, but also from organizations as they look to take advantage of the industrial Internet of Things. So we're seeing a dramatic increase in the attack surface that we have to try and defend. But at the same time, the barriers to entry to be able to attack industrial systems are actually becoming lower all of the time as well. So we're currently tracking approximately 100 freely available tools that have been developed specifically to attack industrial control systems from across a wide variety of vendors and in a wide variety of areas. So we've got these new challenges and they're going to require new solutions. What I'd like to start with, though, is just looking at what we're facing at the moment. So as well as your almost traditional spear phishing campaigns, we're also seeing a large number of attacks against third parties, usually ones where the attackers know that the actual target organization will interact with. So think things like trade organization magazines or trade bodies or things like that, because they know that the cybersecurity for those will often not be quite as strong as it is for the actual organizations that they're interested in. And when they do compromise those websites, they don't make huge changes. So whilst it may look like you're simply visiting the website of a quality higher education establishment in the United Kingdom, it might actually have a few surprises, because what they're actually doing is they've inserted code to actually call back to servers that they control so that they can gain the credential hash of people within the organization and then use offline techniques to try and crack it. So that's one technique that we're seeing a lot. Obviously, Mandana mentioned about SolarWinds. For those that haven't come across it before, SolarWinds provides the Orion information management tool. And what happened here is that the attackers were actually able to compromise the code base so that when an organization actually practiced good patch management and updated its software, they also downloaded the malware that the attackers had managed to inject. And this wasn't a particularly quick attack. This is something that took a lot of resources because they'd first compromised the code base months before. But the very first things that they put in were simply tests and placeholders to see if they would get caught. When they didn't, they then moved on to deploy their real payload. We're also seeing a large number of attacks against VPNs from sophisticated groups, so nation-state attackers. Pulse VPN is currently the subject of a number of attacks from April and March. And what we're seeing are tools that have been designed specifically for this VPN to try and bypass things like the multi-factor authentication. Attackers are also trying to go after the valid credentials of third-party suppliers because, again, they know that the cyber hygiene is usually not as good at these organizations as it is at the main ones. There are stories abound of VPN usernames and passwords being shared by 20, 30 people at third-party suppliers that you just wouldn't have at the main organization. And essentially what they're doing is they're just looking for an easy foothold into the organization. As we move forward, in some ways, this is only going to get worse because we're seeing more and more high consumption devices coming online. Can we cope with botnets using these devices? So what if every Tesla in the world suddenly started charging and then at the same time suddenly stopped? Is the grid actually resilient enough to cope? And what we're seeing in the wild, when we talk to some of the honeypot and honeynet researchers, they're saying that now over 50% of the devices that they're seeing within botnets aren't your standard machines, but they're actually Internet of Things devices. So this is actually something that's going to get worse before it gets better. So what can we try and do about this? Well, one element is the idea of information and intelligence sharing. Now, unfortunately, there are still a lot of information silos, both within organizations and between organizations. So to start with, one of the key things is to increase the interaction between the engineers and IT security staff so that both gain a much better understanding of the role of the others and what they are trying to achieve. When we're looking at the information sharing between organizations, it's entirely reliant on trust. And so this isn't something that can come about overnight. So maybe you're better off identifying the minimum set of information you're willing to share, and then build that up gradually so that when attacks do happen, you're willing to share the highest value information quickly, because the longer it takes to share the information, the less valuable it actually is. There are a number of protocols available to share threat intelligence. Taxi Sticks and Cyboc are simply three that have been highlighted by the NCSC in the UK. We also do need to be aware that when we are sharing any intelligence, we need to make sure that we're still compliant with GDPR and whatever the NIS regulations might be in the country that you're working in. So if we're able to start sharing more of the information, we can build up a better understanding of the threats that we're facing. So rather than just looking at threat actors as indicators of compromise, we can start looking at the human factors behind them. So what are their motivations and their objectives? What sort of commitment do they have? Will they give up at the first sign of resistance? If you can identify what a threat actor is likely to target, you can actually then become far more proactive in defending against that. Because if you've got somebody that you know tries to exfiltrate company IP rather than disrupt the process, you're going to deploy your defenses very differently. As part of this, we're also looking to move towards the idea of dynamic risk analysis. So the idea is that a cyber attack in 2021, for example, might take the exact same form as an attack in 2028, but the risk is going to be very different, because at the moment, the benefits of the new complex systems far outweigh the potential harm. But as we get more of these devices, that is going to invert. And so we're going to need to be able to deal with that. Similarly, it comes down to when we're defending against an incident, we need to be constantly changing and updating our current critical risk register, because you don't need to necessarily focus on areas that you know the threat actors aren't going to try and target. One of the methodologies that we have come up with at De Montfort University is the Industrial Control Systems Cyber Defense Triage process. So what we do here is we marry the intrusion, the diamond model of intrusion analysis with attack activity graphs, and we overlay those on the Purdue model. So the idea here is that, again, if you're able to identify the likely end target for a threat actor, you can then work your way back through the activity attack graph and up the different levels of the Purdue model to stop them before they actually are able to act upon their objectives. So what this means is that hopefully the actual costs and impact on your organization is going to be far, far less. So those are just a few of the ways that we're looking at developing the research to try and cope in this new landscape that we're facing. Thank you very much for your attention. If anyone wants any further information and we aren't able to chat here, then you can always contact me via my email, which is rgs@dmu.ac.uk. And I will now hand you back over to Mandana. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. That's wonderful. So, Richard, we're going to send you back into the audience area for the moment, and then we'll call you back up for the panel discussion where we'll have lots of questions for you then. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. So now I'm going to call up our next speaker, who is John Wells. John will be talking us through a Ukrainian utility case study. And John is an active member of the OSGP Alliance, the global non-profit association dedicated to promoting the adoption of the open smart grid protocol and infrastructure for smart grid applications, which are working towards a future with modern smart grid. So, John, over to you if you'd like to bring up your presentation. Wonderful. I'm good to go. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Mandana. Yes, so my name is John Wells. I work for the OSGP Alliance. We'll spend some time today looking at threat detection in the smart grid. This presentation includes content from a Ukrainian DSO Khmelnytsk Oblenergo and includes the insights of their CISO on the challenges in keeping their smart grid secure as they deploy smart meters into the low voltage grid. We'll start by looking at why threat detection is so important in the low voltage grid. And my apologies, just get to the appropriate slide. We've built a number of capabilities into the smart grid. The ability to control energy supply, the ability to gather data, monitor, control and optimize, and also be able to maintain the equipment that we deploy into the field over many decades. And these are the exact capabilities that the cyber criminal is going to use against us. They've been attacking our SCADA systems, the high voltage and medium voltage domains for some time. And the introduction of low voltage grid intelligence is another mechanism that they'll use to attack us. So we have to ask the question of ourselves whether protection is enough. The current focus of smart meter security is regulation and protection. Now, any smart meter should have multiple layers of defense to block the cyber criminal. And whilst these are important, they're generally static in nature. A modern security system assumes that the protection will be breached, and it includes detection and response as a companion to the protection. And we'll be examining this later on. But first of all, we'll spend a bit of time looking at what motivates the attacker and how that translates into mechanisms of attack. So attackers can be various. The two which can cause the most damage are hostile nation states and organized criminals. Hostile nation states tend to be highly skilled and highly focused. They will invest massive resources of time and money in developing an attack, which they fully intend to execute. For them, developing the means to mount an attack in secret is critically important. The attack may be the result of many years of preparation, so evidence of the beachheads that they establish need to remain hidden. Organized criminals tend to be less skilled and less focused, but they're able to rely on commoditization and hacking as a service to gain the required experience and tools quickly. They'll be less patient as they want a return on their investment. They prefer not to actually have to carry out their attack. They want ransom and a regular income based on a shadowy form of trust that they establish with their victims. Let's look at some of the types of attack. In this first case, the mission is to inflict a power outage. And this is something that a hostile nation state would employ. It's a fairly traditional form of attack. We attack the IT systems through standard phishing attacks and other mechanisms. We then remotely control the meters, disable power supply through the multiple automation means offered by the meter, and we can dodge some lines of protection along the way. The primary victim in this case is actually the population and the population's faith in their government and in their infrastructure. A derailment attack is a very long game, but it's also good for hostile nation states. In this example, the attack is on the operational technology, the control nodes. What happens here is malicious firmware or software is introduced into the control node to slowly change the values being reported by the smart meters. And this impacts billing, processes, and operational efficiency. It has the gradual effect of weakening the energy provider, leading to possible instability in the infrastructure over a long time. In this case, the victim is the energy provider. The third mechanism of attack is a ransom attack, and this is generally the tool of the organized criminal. The attacker accesses a local meter. They're able to develop their access to other smart meters on the same local control node, and they can also take over the control node itself. They may even be able to breach further back into the IT systems. This way, they can develop a beachhead across many thousands of meters over time by installing malicious firmware onto meters. And once they've established a significant portion of infected meters, they launch their attack. And the attack can be blocking access to the meters, it can be remote control, it can even be rendering the smart meter useless by installing malicious firmware. In this case, the victim is the energy supplier. Although in this kind of attack, the consumer is also at risk. Sometimes even if the ransom is paid, the attack may go ahead. That was the attacker's perspective. Let's look a bit at the defender's perspective. And starting to look at some of the history, in Ukraine, the most famous attack was in 2015 using a tool called Black Energy version 3. This was a multi-vector attack on the control systems, the back-end systems, and points of automation and intelligence in the high and medium voltage grids. The fact that it was a multi-vector attack made it harder for the defenders to organize a rapid response. Fortunately, at the time, there was no intelligence in the low voltage grid, so no smart meters deployed. Since then, there's been evidence of other attacks using similar tools, new versions of Black Energy and other similar tools used to infiltrate the IT systems. The obvious conclusion is that Ukraine is going to continue to be under attack, and the introduction of smart grids in Ukraine and other countries will be as interesting for cybercriminals as it is for the energy providers. Unfortunately, the attackers and the defenders tend to be poorly matched. A key point is that the defender has a rapidly growing domain they need to protect. The growing OT infrastructure, high and medium voltage grids, and now the newer low voltage grid infrastructure. The latter is a massive change in the attack surface that the defender needs to protect. And it is effectively a new technology that they're introducing both for the defender and the attacker. The current focus on protection is all very well, but attackers are demonstrating ingenuity and capability to work around the defenses. But there's an assumption that IT security will lead to OT, so operational technology security, and then that will naturally evolve into smart meter security. There are similarities between the domains, but there's also significant differences as well. For example, OT security focuses on safety and recognizes that the cyber criminal can cause harm to people and damage to infrastructure and property as a mechanism of attack. So focusing on health and safety as an attack vector. The differences as we get to the smart grid and low voltage grid and the smart meters are even more substantial. So there'll be different forms of technology, sometimes proprietary communications in place. And these devices have their own sets of capabilities and operational requirements. So we have to accept that the protection layers will be breached. We need to look at the tools that are available to the security operations team in the low voltage grid and the smart meter deployments. The IT has got well-established tooling for looking at cybersecurity, and that includes threat detection and response. OT has extended these to cover the SCADA systems, so the control systems, and also the IT-like intelligence, which is currently found in the high and the medium voltage grids. There are limitations on the low voltage grid, however, where there are significantly different sets of operational processes and procedures. And even when we stop to look at things like audits, so penetration tests, for example, we need to recognize that pen testing skills relevant to the low voltage smart meter technology are actually in very short supply. So we need to help the defenders by giving them tooling to help them recognize that something suspicious is actually happening in the low voltage grid. This brings us on to the final stage, which is to look at what a threat detection and response system might look like and how it applies to the low voltage grid. So here's an example. A typical threat detection solution supports 5 key functions that are critical for a security ops team looking at their smart meters. It aggregates many apparently disconnected events into one security incident. It describes the scope of the attack. It provides a timeline showing the initial suspicious activity. It provides an attack map showing how the attack has been executed, and it provides a recommended remediation to block the attack and limit the attacker, the damage that the attacker can do. And this brings significant benefits to the security operations team. It embeds the experience of the scarce low voltage smart grid ethical hackers into a system, which can then be updated as new weaknesses and potential exploits emerge. It focuses on security operations teams and makes sure that they focus on the key security events, rather than having them chasing hundreds or thousands of merely suspicious or associated events. It presents how the attack started, and it may even identify a perpetrator or their associates. And finally, it provides a mechanism for learning and sharing, potentially across the international community. So this tool augments both the protection mechanisms offered by the low voltage smart grid devices themselves, and also the IT/OT threat detection systems that may already be in place. The objective is to recognize that threats will develop and breaches will occur, but puts in place tools to identify this quickly, and for the unique technologies and systems which are being currently deployed into the low voltage grid. And this achieves a reduced mean time to response to threat and attack. Many thanks for your time. I hope it's been interesting to hear about threat detection and response and the experience and some of the lessons learned from one Ukraine energy provider. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That's great. So we'll ask you to take your seat back in the audience, and
Okay.
I'll call you back up shortly for the panel discussion. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to call up to the screen Anton de Rossi. And Anton is OT subject matter expert and business development lead for EMEA. Anton is a certified global industrial cyber professional trained at SANS Institute, and he holds an MSc in telecoms and IT and an MBA. With 20 years experience in product management, sales and marketing, Anton has mostly worked for industrial clients together with General Electric, Alstom and Altran. Anton currently leads the OT strategy and revenue growth at Fortinet for the EMEA region. So welcome, Anton. And with that, I'll hand over to you and see you shortly.
Thank you, Mandana, and welcome everyone. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Screen share. Can you confirm, Mandana, that you are seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks again. It's always a pleasure to be your guest at Smart Grid and join Richard and join John today. So, all right, I will talk about 3 key topics today during the next 10 minutes. It's first about some next generation cybersecurity solutions that are available. Then talking about regulation and law enforcement. And third, we'll have a look at honeypots and how they can support your security as asset owner in the smart grid domain. Okay, so let me first talk quickly about the challenges our industry is facing. All right, so as Richard mentioned before, there is an evolution of the threat landscape. First, bad actors are using AI to automate attacks. Second, the huge amount of data brought to the SOC is making it very difficult to triage, identify, and respond to attack. then advanced persistent threat groups can deceive your teams with camouflage of malware behaviors. And finally, analysts are often lacking cybersecurity experience as well as capacity, especially when it comes to analyzing OT context. And I wanted to get a higher view to appreciate the complexity we are talking about. These are NIST extract showing high-level views of our smart grid network topology. Utilities need to deal with security issues over power generation, transmission, down to distribution to end customer. They also get data flow from the markets and service providers. And the transition to smart grids architecture is actually leading to a growing number of connected systems, as we can see on the right. These are very big challenge for smart grid today. And what about the threat landscape? I'm going to show here a very high level because Richard already talked about that, but 2020 was a blast for attackers targeting critical infrastructure. And this is a quick recap with the major trends Fortinet Threat Intelligence is observing in OT. First, acceleration of attacks, and even more so about the COVID context, which increased remote access needs. COVID-19 phishing campaign have been targeting heavily critical infrastructure, and the Fox Kitten campaign has been leveraging one-day vulnerabilities in remote access. This is actually still impactful because utilities too often fail to upgrade their SSL VPN connection. Second, advanced persistent threat or APT groups are still a major threat, being able to craft 0 days and APTs. But since the disappearance of the IT/OT air gap, clearly ransomware became the major threat in occurrence for OT. These ransomware are not only being recycled from IT to target OT, but new ransomware are now targeting OT systems directly. And two good examples are Snake and Megacortex. Then the explosion of IIoT devices, such as smart sensors, and are bringing new vulnerabilities, just like Ripple 20. Finally, SolarWinds breach is teaching us a very important lesson. There will be more supply chain attacks because the return on investment is bigger for bad actors. And this is what most of them are looking for. Now, the good news is we have solid defense against these attacks. So I wanted to have a look at the defense in depth. So how do we defend OT in critical infrastructure? It is all about, just like in IT, good defense in depth. You secure your OT by reducing the surface of vulnerability, adding layers of security. First is the built-in security of the control platform. Are they running trusted OS and secure application? Then is communication secured with the right level of encryption and authentication? And what do we do if it is not? Are we segmenting the network to limit the broadcasting domain? What about system integrity? Is the system properly hardened? Do we have role-based access control and endpoint protection? Are AV signatures up to date and our system properly patched? Last but not least, do we have a good organizational security? Meaning, do we have a cybersecurity framework in place? Are we compliant to regulation? And how do we manage incidents? Now, whatever the maturity stage of your cybersecurity program, we shall make sure the critical controls I listed on the left are in place. Now, we also need to get ahead of the evolving threat landscape that we described. So critical controls are not sufficient. First, we will need integration and orchestration, because all these layers of security are addressed with several point products, and it becomes a nightmare for OT and SOC resources to manage all this. So a good API orchestration will be critical for this. We want zero trust for users, devices, and application, both for networks and endpoints. Advanced secured remote access with multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, and secure file exchange. IoT and wireless devices come with new vulnerability and different communication paths. We need to deal with that. Endpoint detection and response, so EDR, to preserve your critical asset uptime. Microsegmentation to bring VLAN flexibility in a secure manner. Sandboxing to test and demine the unknown in a secured, confined environment, including within the OT secure perimeter. Machine learning and artificial intelligence to help SOC triage, learn about application interaction, and perform behavior analytics. Then our community is starting to adopt Mitre for ICS, which was released not long ago. And there are new tools for simulating attacks against your critical infrastructure along the Mitre framework. And finally, there are honeypots that can help as well, and we'll discuss this in a minute. But let's have a look before at regulation. In the last few months, Fortinet worked with Sense to map its security solutions against the main regulatory framework. We did it against IEC 62443, NIST, NERC-CIP, and the NIST directive. These are detailed actually in white paper and webinars at Sense, at both Sense and Fortinet. I wanted to display a snapshot of the NIST directive compliance mapping. Together with ENISA, it is converging the various EU member states' directive into a single corpus for CSIRT coordination and cyber best practice sharing. So these pillars, they are really a roadmap for CISOs and CSOs. First is asset management. It's also often the place to start because you cannot secure what you cannot see. It will include asset inventory, vulnerability management, and other aspects. Once we know our assets, we need to make sure access is made easy and secure for our processes. We need a good identity and access management with role-based access control. Then there is segmentation piece along the Purdue ISA 99 reference model to create zones and conduits, also taking into consideration IIoT and wireless device within the OT secure perimeter. Then we need logging and monitoring, both for IT and OT, in order to monitor events, report them, as well as to perform incident management. The most difficult for the end, risk management, it's all about evaluating what can go wrong before it happens. So for this, you really want to have an orchestrated security platform. What I wanted to convey here is whatever the OT security standard and security level you need to comply to, you want a solution that is well integrated and orchestrated to support you in this critical compliance effort. Okay, so let me go now to honeypots. Honeypots, they are advanced techniques to implement after the critical controls. Advanced does not mean it is science fiction or dedicated only to lab environments. We are deploying them at Fortinet a lot in IT, and we are first mover in the OT domain. There are mainly two types of asset owners making use of deception. First, asset owners that are very mature in their cybersecurity program, but also we find them useful in flat networks where customer can change the network architecture, but still need good detection in place during a ransomware crisis, for example. Why do we deploy them? Well, it is to attract bad actors using lures in order to eliminate the threat and observe attackers' behaviors to improve your defense measures. So first, we deceive, luring attackers with decoys that will behave like real IT and OT assets and are highly interactive. These decoys, they can be several, and they are centrally managed for automated deployments. They are centrally managed they are deployed in the form of VMs. So they will act like fake PLCs, RTUs, or HMIs, and they will generate TCP traffic and industrial protocol as well, such as Modbus, Ethernet IP, DNP3, 104, S7, or BACnet. So these VM decoys, they can also lure IT types of assets like Windows or Linux workstation. So you can basically decoy accounts, content, credentials, network, persona, or even processes. Second, we will expose bad actors. The central console acts as an early warning system that generates alerts for review and validation to the SOC environment. It will consolidate detection and correlation of external and internal actors' activities into a single pan view. In this single pan view, we can observe bad actors' tactics, techniques, and procedures, such as persistence, evasion, lateral movements, or CNC techniques. Finally, the deceptor or honeypot will eliminate. It will do this manually or automatically with a severity-based blocking rule. Then the next-gen firewall will quarantine the associated external and internal IP address. And the network access control will isolate the device. Finally, it is a passive solution with zero impact on the production network. It does not require any agent or network topology changes and can be deployed easily using built-in automation. So what are the benefits here? It's basically first-hand insight into bad actors' TTPs. Then we'll have a reduction of false alarms because we are only getting true attack traffic here. This is what we're seeing here is segregated from the real industrial process. So if these decoys VMs are generating alerts, you know the alarm is basically real. And as you gain intelligence around TTPs, you can orient your additional defense in depth investment toward the critical control that makes the most sense. This is the contextual threat actors that Richard was mentioning initially. What is the drawback? Well, just like any cybersecurity solution, it will require resources to implement, configure, and maintain. So I want to insist on that. And this is a good transition to close with a few takeaways. So I listed here my humble recommendation to asset owners, system integrators, and control vendors. These are not written in stone, but more something for you to take away from this very short session. Know your OT network. It seems obvious, but it is not always the case. You cannot protect what you cannot see. Make your implementation simple. OT is complicated enough. So is security. Therefore, make your choices based on simplicity, product lifecycle management, and orchestration capabilities. Start with the basic critical control. First thing first. And the best place to start is segmentation, especially your IT-OT boundary. Then stay ahead of the evolving threat landscape. Programs like Zero Trust Architecture for users and device and application, as well as having a good response plan, should come next. Plan for IIoT and 5G deployment. Think about these when you define your asset management and segmentation strategy. And finally, take the best of OT standards and best practice and use them as a roadmap. Fortinet just produced a new white paper about this topic. I invite you to take a look at it. You can Google it, and I want to thank you for your attention. I hope this was a useful session. And then I'm going to open to my cat that is making noise.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Anton. So we're just going to close down your presentation now. And whilst you take care of the cat, we're going to call up John and Richard once again to address some questions and also to get some panel debate going. Right, wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen, for those presentations. Fantastic insights, really helpful, really detailed and insightful. So we have a few questions from the audience here. We'll start there. The first question is for Richard. And the question is, in the current open source software where a lot of developers push changes, there are some who will introduce loopholes with malicious intent. Is the same possible when intelligence gathering using crowdsourcing? If so, how can we protect ourselves from that? Richard.
Okay, yeah, that is a really interesting question. So to start with, I would say in terms of the open source community, this has happened in the past. So malicious developers have been able to sneak malware into Linux distributions. But what I will say is that they were caught incredibly quickly. So I think the malicious version of Linux was only available for 24 hours before it was taken down. And in many ways, it's a similar approach to crowdsourcing in intelligence. Yes, you might have one or two bad apples who are providing false information, but if you have a much larger group of people looking for information, then in essence, it almost the bad data gets dampened by the sheer volume of the other data. Another option is to work on the trust model. So with your intelligence, you might not simply accept something from one person, but they might actually look at it and say, whatever information is going to be ingested needs to have been approved by 2 or 3 trusted sources. So you can look at introducing various different trust models into how you're doing it. And also there are a number of AI techniques, because this is exactly the same problem that machine learning and artificial intelligence faces. How can you protect the machine learning and AI data sets against manipulation so that an attacker doesn't, for example, poison the data set for your security cameras? So all they need to do is put on a red cap and they will completely disappear from any tracking algorithm. In essence, it comes down to trust and verification. And there are a number of different ways that you can go about that. So hopefully that's answered that one a little bit.
Great, thank you so much, Richard. John, Anton, do you have any comments to follow on from there?
I'd say Richard's given a very comprehensive answer from my perspective.
Agree. No further comment.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have a question from Luka Moknik at Elektrogorenza. John, perhaps we can start with you here. Is security operations team meant team in security operations center or group of experts inside, for example, a utility company?
Okay, I think there's a kind of wider answer to that, which is who in the organization is responsible for security, and particularly the new domains that are being introduced. So our experience, we talk with quite a few DSOs and at different levels of maturity in terms of how they approach cybersecurity. And a key challenge that's being faced is the smart meters. 5-10 years ago, in a lot of organizations that have only just started the smart meter rollout, those meters were not really points of attack for a cyber criminal. So you end up with an operations team that's responsible for managing the meters and then the smart meters, that's actually sometimes even disconnected from the wider security operations team, which is responsible for managing the end-to-end security of the overall organization. So we find ourselves sometimes in a position where there is a centralized SecOps team for the DSO itself, and they'll have all the great tooling. They'll have SIEM platforms, intrusion detection systems, all of the the kind of asset registries and all that kind of stuff that's essential for keeping the organization secure. And then there'll be a separate team of people who find themselves suddenly responsible for the smart meters. So when we talk about a SecOps team, we're generally trying to encourage the DSOs that we talk to centralize within their utility one group of people that is responsible for corporate security and make sure that that is fully cognizant of the new technologies that are being introduced into the smart through the smart grid, especially the low voltage grid, which is, if you want, the newest area of development. Bring it all together, bring it into a SIEM, and that way, when you're attacked in the same way that Ukraine was attacked, a multi-vector attack. The attack there was the electricity substations. They even did a denial of service attack on the call center, so that people couldn't actually call in to complain about the energy outages that they were afflicted with. A multi-vector attack needs a single system that understands what's actually going on across the corporation. So a consolidated security operations team. There we go.
Very wonderful. Thank you, John. We have a question for you, Anton, around the honeypot concept. So is honeypot a product or is it a set of tools that can be used for grid protection?
So it will depend of the vendors. At Fortinet, it is basically it's a product. It's a product, but it's more of a platform. As I was showing on the slide before, you've got this platform that typically will be deployed outside of the OT secure perimeter, and that can deploy VMs, and will basically automate these deployments. So it's one product that is centralized and that deploys VM within a network on different places in order to stimulate different types of communication, be them IT or OT related. It's a product.
Great, thank you for that. For any of our speakers, this question, please raise your hand if you'd like to answer it. How do you see engineering strategies fitting into traditional cybersecurity procedures and technologies?
I'll maybe start, although I'm sure my colleagues will come in with their view. I think my focus is always out on the smart meter technology, and what we find is that the kind of engineering deployment of smart grid technology, it is using different kinds of communications protocols to those that are found in traditional IT networks. So we spend a lot of time looking at power line communications technologies. So this is squirting data over those power lines. It's a very different form of communication to traditional Ethernet and IP messaging. So the actual how someone can actually break into those communications protocols is a little different to perhaps a more traditional IT approach. We also need to recognize the way that a cyber criminal will try to induce things like power outages and corruption of data on the fly. So we actually try to anticipate, given the capabilities of the smart meter and the communications technology and topologies in which they exist, how a cyber criminal will try to get past the defenses of a smart meter, whether they'll attack the smart meter, the communications channel in the middle, or whether they'll go up into the control node. So bringing it back to the question, we find that the engineering associated with a smart meter rollout means that we have to complement the traditional IT and OT security measures.
Anton.
Yes, I would build on what John just said, saying that when you talk about engineering in OT, be it critical infrastructure or other types of environment, making use of ICS, it's all about optimization. And there are many things changing. It's all about digitization, more data, we're talking about digital twins, we talked about IIoT, 5G. There are many other things that are happening. From a cybersecurity perspective, all this disruption is having a major impact because, as Richard mentioned initially, we are just moving up the surface of vulnerability. The digital surface, attack surface is going up. So it means that from an engineering standpoint, there is a need to have more awareness of what are the risks associated with optimization through digitization, and understanding, working with the cybersecurity experts to bring together the right measure to go on this optimization journey. So a lot of working together is needed, and it's all about people, process, technology, people at the beginning.
Great.
Yeah, if I can just jump in, I just wanted to make a point that I agreed with both of my fellow panelists actually, because when we're in Antoine's slides, you saw that the traditional CIA triad for IT security is very different for OT security. They've got different priorities. And I think what sometimes happens is at the moment, there isn't really enough communication and interaction going on between the engineers and IT security people, because with the engineering processes, you can have so many knock-on effects that you don't really, as an IT security person, you don't fully understand the implications of some of the things that you might try and actually execute. Whereas for the engineers, they might not fully understand some of the risks and the mitigation strategies that can be used. And I think John made a really good point with this centralized team, because what you don't want is the very first time that you have your security from IT and OT people together in the same room and talking, or virtually talking as it might be at the moment, is when an incident is actually happening. They need to be able to work together as a team, and you can only do that by setting them up before an incident actually occurs.
Very good point. Great, thank you for that. Okay, I think we have time for one final question. And that is from Amit Rain. The question is it good to have unidirectional connectivity between IT and OT environments for tasks like AV updates, patch management, and so on? If not, then what are the standard practices to keep OT environments up to date? Who would like to address it?
I can take that one. I mean, it would really depend on the requirements set up by the asset owner. Good usage of unidirectional communication will be to send historian data from the OT domain to the IT domain. Now, the IT-OT boundary in general, the best practice would be to do that with a next-gen firewall. Then how do you secure that? Well, you get a good next-gen firewall, and especially you make sure that you implement the right policy to make sure that you allow the right set of communication and establish the right control for this IT-OT boundary. And another important best practice is that these boundaries should be unique. We don't want to have X amount of communication to our third-party asset owners for monitoring and diagnostic. This is happening too often. It's a huge risk. We want only one communication path between IT and OT.
Right. Thank you, Anton. Well, I think this is a good point in which we wrap up the webinar. So thank you, gentlemen, for participating and contributing your insights and your thoughts. Thank you for those presentations, and thanks to the audience for all your questions. We have a few more to get through, but unfortunately we've run out of time, so apologies that we can't quite get to those. We will be sending you all an email with a few questions for you to answer, just to give us some feedback about how the webinar went for you and how we can improve it. We do have a monthly program of these webinars coming up the last Wednesday of each month. So keep an eye out. The next one is on social engineering at the end of May, so that should be very interesting. And we'll also send you a link to download all the presentations from today. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and look forward to seeing you on the platform again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.